Welcome to episode 8 of What's That Sound? My name's Stu Watts and my guest today is Darius Papak. He has a company called Mix on the Move, which is basically a van that he's converted into a recording studio. So we discuss how he got that up and running. We also talk about why building a connection with your clients is so important, as well as his mixing process, which is a little bit different to what you might be used to. It revolves around summing. So make sure you listen to the whole episode to get a full understanding of what that's all about. Let's get into it. Episode 8 of What's That Sound? You're listening to What's That Sound with your host, Stu Watts. Welcome. Here we are, episode 8. Today, my guest, Darius Papak. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming all this way.
Of course.
Well, I guess, we'll get into that. We'll get into you living in or working out of your van and stuff around, like that.
Yeah.
But tell us first of all about who you are and what you do.
Awesome. My name's Darius. I'm just primarily I'm a songwriter. That's what I've done most of my life. And that's coupled into becoming a producer and engineer in the sort of latter part of my career. I have worked at a couple studios, mostly Wrangler Studios and Restless Noise Studios with Tim.
Yep. Shout out Tim, who we had on the podcast a few episodes back.
What a legend, man.
Absolute legend.
And then I've started my business recently, Mix on the Move. So into my van, as we were just sort of talking about, I've built a studio into the back of that. I've got it powered by the sun so I can travel wherever I want, keep making music, keep working on clients' music and stuff as well. But it also gives me that option to go to clients and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's just a unique little platform, I suppose.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that. Like where'd you come up with the idea, all that sort of thing?
Well, I've always been into the idea of tiny house living and stuff. I would always follow those on Instagram and stuff. So I kind of always wanted to get like a really efficient small home anyway. Mm-hmm. And then that subsequently got me watching those van videos, people refurbing their vans and stuff. And I like, building and that. And I wanted to learn about electricity as well. Mm-hmm. During COVID, I was actually studying a biotech degree,
cool.
which I didn't finish, but it just interested me.
Yeah, right.
But it meant I couldn't get paid the supplementary payments.
Okay.
And I'd already used all my Oz study and stuff as well, so I couldn't get that either. And I was put at this crux point where I needed to, figure out a way to be able to manage rent and, life and all of that. So got my super out. Bought a van, big risk, but I just thought if I turn this into a business as well and make it something fully efficient and that, can assist. One of the biggest things that just always bug me about being in a studio is being crammed in a dark room for hours and hours,
Totally.
Even in summer and on sunny
I feel
days.
that.
As we all know, right?
Yeah, sometimes I walk out of here and I'm like, what time is it? It's still sunlight. That's cool.
Scratching the eyes and being like, why don't I?
You have no idea. There's no weather. There's nothing. Like I've got my air conditioning, but it doesn't do much. But
you just get lost in it,
all,
right?
Yeah.
So I just wanted something that would give me another option to be able to, you got to work with an artist in the studio most of the time, but then once it gets down to mixing, I don't need to be in the studio, so I can just take, go camping or something like that, kick the doors open and mix.
Yeah. So cool.
So I kind of just put that all together, bought the van, started refurbing it. I had a few issues getting it started, just mechanical issues with the van, which was sort of anticipated, but it took a little longer than I thought.
Yep.
But now now it's in full operation, so I'm super happy with it. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Well, let's take a step back and we'll have a bit of a chat about where it all started for you. Like where did music come into play for you?
Love it. Yeah. Awesome. As long as I can remember, I've been playing guitar. My dad, he had 8 guitars hanging up on the rack in his study, I remember, and he said he used to play guitar in front of us and we'd always just watch and then he'd just put it on the ground and leave the room and then we'd start strumming it. And so literally for as long as I can remember, I've been playing guitar.
Yeah, awesome.
And for whatever reason, I just wanted to write music as well. I remember writing songs like when I was 8 years old. And then we moved to Saudi Arabia for 4 years. This is back in like 97, I think we moved over there, which is super trippy, awesome, loved it. But it meant we had a little more money at that point.
And how old were you then?
I turned 10 when we moved there.
Right.
Yeah, so born in 87,
Yeah.
And then, time flies, huh?
I'm the same. I'm born in 87 as well.
Yeah, nice. Nobody needs to know. And then, so we had a little more money to work with. My dad loves music, so he bought like a basic studio. He bought Pro Tools, which was pretty crazy back then, the old Digibox.
Yeah.
And then, and me and my brother, we just record music all the time, write music and record music all the time. Like,
do you still have all of that stuff?
We've even got the old sessions, but you can't even open them anymore. We tried opening them recently, but it's just all, it changed so much. But we've got all those old songs, and
that's sick.
it's horrible but awesome at the same time. It's what you started at, sort of thing.
Yeah, 100%. So who musically were the influences, or who did you love?
It's such a tough thing. Like for us growing up in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was just that change in music where things got so crisp and awesome. So, I mean, primarily I loved by my teens like pop punk, any of that, Blink 182, just Sum 41, anything.
Yep.
No effects.
Yep.
But anything that was on like the Epitaph, I just devoured those records.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm right there with you.
Yeah, nice.
Yep.
And but like kind of anything though. I mean, when I was younger, when I started writing music, my favorite artist at the time was Celine Dion, and I remember I used to just put "I'm Your Lady" on repeat. I would have been like 6 years old or something. And I just used to look at that record cover and just be like, "You are my lady, Celine," and just like listen to it. I loved it, man. Like, was a sucker for ballads and melodies,
Oh man, and that one that Meatloaf wrote with the oh man, that track's absolutely amazing,
insane,
like, crazy. Yeah,
exactly.
Like my dad had that album actually. It's
nice,
phenomenal. But sonically even like
that's it. Right?
It was like I mean, like it was ballads.
Yes.
There was a bit of pop in there as well, but it was just crystal clear. And that was like, they weren't recording on digital in like 95.
No, they wouldn't have been, or at least not the most of it.
No, exactly. So crazy.
Just insane what they would do. And there was just something about it. Just anytime I'd have headphones on, like as loud as it can be. I mean, this is the case for most people, obviously, but it just drew me in so much I couldn't describe it. Like all I wanted to do was write music and make those sounds. I had no idea how or what, but I just wanted to do it,
Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah.
When did the focus on like mixing, recording?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I dabbled in recording when I was younger, and I got sort of proficient in Pro Tools, but my brother, who most of my time making music, I'd make music with him, sort of thing. And by the time we came back to Australia, and I had my old like pop punk bands in high school and stuff. I remember I recorded an EP, and then I showed it to my brother, and then like the next day he'd come back and he'd mixed a bunch of the songs, and I was like, "Oh, this is awesome, man!" Once again, horrible stuff, but it was just so good to us at the time, And
I think it's a lot of it is just obviously the feeling of having something that you've done being played back to you.
Exactly.
It's like it doesn't feel like anything else.
Nah,
it's
exactly.
like I was like back in like when I was 15, I was in a band called Rumour Has It. Shout out Rumour Has It, guys.
Nice.
We had like a little 4-track tape recorder, which is actually upstairs right now.
Sick.
And it's like, it sounds so shit. It's so bad. I think it's a Tascam.
Yeah.
But then I got my own one. But the sound of them was terrible. But just the ability to do that was like you were living the dream.
Absolutely,
like,
right?
To be a teenager, and because the technology that exists now that you can get so cheap, even if you can crack it for free, like not encouraging that, but that's how you do it when you first get it. But you couldn't do that back then. So it was like, this is the best.
Yeah.
And then going into the recording studio for the first time, like for me, it was like heaven.
Insane experience, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Totally. Like we were fortunate to have Pro Tools, so not having to necessarily use the multi-track, you know, tape devices and that. Not to say that we didn't previously, because friends would have that when we were younger, but I wasn't so much at that stage. By the time I got into it, we had Pro Tools, so, you know, which was horrible to use,
so
back
clunky,
so difficult, but you know,
I mean, I
like,
still find it difficult.
Yeah, exactly. Like it still kind of is.
I can throw shade at Pro Tools all the time. I
That's it, right?
Care, but anyway,
I know it like the back of my hand, but I can understand, especially now that I've started sort of using Logic and stuff as well, just to expand on the doors that I use.
Obviously, like whatever you use, if you're good at it, you're good at it.
That's it.
That's what it comes down to at the end of the day.
That's right.
So, do you remember if you had any like producer idols back then? Like, did you know about producers and mix engineers or anything like that back then? Or?
Yeah, not really as much. I definitely, back in my early days, I was way more focused on the music. Like I dabbled in a little bit of mixing, but by mixing, that was basically balancing, maybe chucking on some reverb at one point when I figured out what that was. And that was about
being
it,
way too loud for it. Like,
exactly. Being like, this is awesome. Painting it, why doesn't it sound like, you know, just that typical thing. But that would be the extent of it. And my brother sort of really took the reins on that and did that side of it, and I focused more on the creative side of things and writing and producing. Sorry, my phone keeps buzzing, and I think this is Timmy boy.
Timmy.
It is. He knows I'm here though. Sorry, Timmy.
So then, like, well, when did it start to become like, okay, I'm going to actually do this myself?
Do the engineering side, yeah. So in my late 20s, really.
Right.
Because after my brother, so we were doing bands together. We did Waverley in 1891. And then he had his first child. And then at the time, I was just started at uni for my biotech degree the first time I was doing it.
Yep.
And then Andy, the bassist, he also had a child. So it was like we all just kind of split apart, but I still needed to do music, but I didn't have, you know, I was kind of a bit blessed to have Daniel, you know, for lack of a better word, blessed to have Daniel there to do all the recording side of things. And so it was just like, if I'm going to be able to sustainably continue doing this, because clearly I'm addicted, I've just got to keep doing it. I've got to figure out how to actually get better at mixing and you know, that side of things.
So you sat down and kind of started learning more and practicing. So I just sat down and
started nutting it out. You know, just really.
And when did the work come into play? Like working at Wrangler, was that first?
That was the first time I sort of started getting gigs. Work when I was first at Wrangler, that was probably where I really started to be able to explore the mixing side of things more, because there was access to more plugins there and that sort of stuff, you know, a few more microphones than I necessarily had, you know, because my brother kept most of the studio gear that we had got. So that was probably where it really started. And it was only maybe like 6 months or so, because it wasn't like I was bad straight off the bat. I wasn't coming in, you know, not knowing anything. I literally sat through all the mix sessions with my brother. I knew what was going on. It was just that he was holding the mouse more. He was faster and more proficient and had these other skills in it that I didn't, you know. So it wasn't that far to get to a point where I could get work kind of thing, which is fortunate.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it is the way that it is regardless when you start at mixing. You're not good and
practice.
And people are still going to, you know, take a punt with you and give you some money and let you mix it, and it's awesome.
Continuously progressing. Like
non-stop.
You cannot stop getting better because you keep learning stuff.
Exactly.
And there's always new technology coming out. There's always new mixers have new techniques that you learn about. All that sort of thing. So
you know,
it's awesome. It's
And as you jump from style to style, you start really getting and doing it more often. You really start to get to hone in what works best for this style or that style, etc.
So tell us a bit about Wrangler. What was the experience like?
So Wrangler was really good in those early days. Dino had been running that place for a good 5 or 6 years as primarily a music venue / studio, and he had Cassidy who was working with him at the studio, but Cassidy had gone off to sort of do some other things as well when I came in, and it was in like a bit of this tough spot because being an all ages venue, it wasn't making, you know, really any money. But it had rent and bills to pay and all of this sort of stuff. Totally. So we just worked really hard together, Dino and I, for a long time to
Shout out Dino.
Yeah, shout out Dino to clear all that debt, as much as possible and orient things towards more having like a studio, getting, mics and preamps and all of these things and try to rack up business. And so then I did a few mix jobs through there as well, which helped, us get a real good understanding that it could be done with, other engineers and all sorts of things. And I don't really work there much these days, but in those early days, like that was just a really good, fun, enjoyable experience. A great way to just sort of.
Well, it's all learning, isn't it? Like
straps.
It was similar for me. I mean, when I first got the job here, we hadn't opened yet, and so I helped Bennett. Shout out Marshall. I helped him buy all the gear. Bought all the microphones, desk, everything. We kind of set it up together, but I was the only engineer here, so I was kind of like I'd done my own stuff with my own gear previously. I had a portable setup, which I still got, old Mackie 16-channel portable desk thing. But it was kind of like learning as I went here as well. It's like you have to learn what the rooms sound like. You have to learn what the speakers sound like. You have to, the more that you work with people, you start to figure out different personality types and like how people work together and what to look out for to avoid certain things.
That's it. Yeah.
All of those little intricacies that you can't learn without actually doing it.
That's it.
They're the hardest things. It's like you can play and mix and you can record. That's easy at the end of the day. It's like you just do it.
Yeah.
But working with different personalities and understanding people and how bands actually work is really difficult. Really difficult.
Yeah.
So, yeah, man.
Especially because, both in music and engineering, like imposter syndrome is so rife that, trying to work as a producer to get the best out of a musician who's feeling like an imposter, and it's like you're both kind of doing
especially
it.
Especially
just trying to get through
at Wrangler when you're like working with probably more young bands, right? Like
primarily.
Much, yeah. And so even that, I've noticed like the different age groups have different mentalities, and it can be really tough to work with young people, not in the sense of that, it's not enjoyable. It's the fact that they don't necessarily have a grasp of like social things or finances and things like that, or even just like being able to work with people toward a common goal. I feel like that's a little bit of a more difficult thing when you're younger, just because you haven't been in the real world for that long. So that's
that was even a big thing for us that sort of made it troubling to get to a point where it was like, what do you actually charge, sort of thing, as we were really trying to establish the studio, because so many people are so young, don't really have the money, you're not really actually sure what your time's worth, and anything that we made from those ones that like I was engineering or Dino was engineering was in the end just going all back into Wrangler, whether it was merch or preamps or microphones, just to build the studio and get it to where it is now. Like obviously Dino does that more than anyone, but it was a really interesting time to sort of just figure out all those things, 100%, 100%. And very rewarding to actually put all of that time and money in and see it grow and become what it is now.
100%. And then, so how'd you meet Tim?
So then Tim used to rehearse at Wrangler Studios with his band Loser and Grim Rhythm and stuff as well. So I would often let them into the studio and set them up, and then I'd go let them into the main room and set them up, and then I'd go into the studio and just work on some of my own music. Mostly I'd be working on my own music or something like that, just practicing mixing and putting stuff together. And then Tim used to often pop his head in, Tim and Will, and they'd just be like, dude, like, why aren't you releasing your music? We love this stuff. It's like, what the hell? This is awesome. And made me feel so awesome. It was really cool. Yeah. And because, Loser's amazing, obviously. Anything Tim's done is amazing. Like,
so Tim's very, very good at what he does, absolutely.
He's just unbelievable.
But so are you.
Well, I appreciate that, but like, I also just like to admire when someone is something else, that's just, it's such an inspiration,
Totally. I think that's one of the best things about, again, I've said this on past podcasts, but it is one of the main reasons why I'm doing it, is because I've met that many people that are so good at what they do, and you just don't hear about people doing this stuff.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
only if you're in the industry and actually have worked with people that you really know about them.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's partly why I'm doing this. But
I think it's a great idea. I think it's so awesome. Like, you know, it's something that I'm like, this is what I want to always, when you're on YouTube or anything, just trying to get any information from mixers and engineers. And sometimes the most important thing that you need early on is just to hear someone be like, yeah, man, I sucked and I'm still learning and it's okay. Like, and I'm not always 100% confident, but that's just what it is. Yeah. Like,
let's talk about your music and your sensibilities. What I've noticed is it's very organic and, you know, for lack of a better term, analog. Like, I know that sounds stupid, but
these days, that's what I'm trying to emulate.
But the sounds of early rock are really strong. You got really, really warm drum sounds. You've got nice acoustic guitar tones. You've got really, you know, somewhat clean guitar sounds. Yeah. Even if they are like, you know, overdriven or distorted even, it still to me is very clean sounding. But it still sounds like it's been put through a tape machine and stuff like that, which I really like. So
cool.
Tell us a bit more about like why that? Why does that sound appealing to you?
Yeah. Like once again, I guess it's that thing of, you know, coming from the most addictive part of listening to music to me being in the early 2000s and late 90s, where it was a little bit of that transition from analog to digital, but also the combination of it. So we suddenly got this clarity in mixing like you'd never had before, you know, cymbals and guitars and vocals and it just, you know, sounded insane. Yeah. And it's just something that like, that's it. That's what got me into it. And that's what I am most drawn to. So these days I know who the producers are and stuff of the songs that I really loved and the bands and that. So I do know more about them now, but that was always, you know, the primary influence, even just starting out, like trying to replicate my favorite things that I used to hear.
Who are some of those producers that you really love?
Well, like obviously Jerry Finn, right? How can you not? Just insane. Like once I learned what he'd done, I was like, that's literally everything that I was most addicted to. You know, how the hell did you do that? It's so sad. He's, you know,
totally
that he passed, and that there's just so little information about his style and stuff like that. But also that's
and the process, I guess. Again, it was like that time before I would say, you know, 2010. Yeah. I feel like that's kind of like the crossover when information started to become more readily available and you wouldn't even know who a producer was or what their process was or anything like that.
That's it, right?
But yeah, man, who else?
So then Eric Valentine is a massive inspiration for me. Like, I don't necessarily always like the styles that he'll mix in, but I love his philosophy of style.
Right,
you know?
like right there with you. He's
awesome.
Top tier for me. So
just nuts. Like I love. Watching Eric Valentine's videos was probably the big, because he's got his, I don't know if people know, obviously he's got his YouTube channel where he just literally goes through some of his mixes and it's just insane. It's just what you've always wanted to see. And he's, you know, being that he grew up from the analog world, but has such a vision on therefore what plugins are good to replicate that analog sound that he needed. And, you know, just even things like where he'd be like, I have to run, you know, something through the Saturn first, because if I don't run it through the Saturn, it just doesn't run through the compressor or the EQ the way that I'm used to it running. I think just little things like that just flipped, you know, just changed my mind. So he's definitely a massive influence for me. I'd say they're like probably my top two, really. But even just anyone who's willing to give out information as well, like Warren Stewart. I love Warren Stewart, obviously. I'm really bad with names, so it's like I'm picturing people in my head too right
Warren
now.
Hewitt?
Warren Hewitt, sorry.
There you go.
There you go, exactly.
No, that's cool. Like, I mean, definitely there's a revolution in sharing information. The thing that I struggle with early on, but now have a really good understanding, is being able to know which information is worth watching. Yes. Because there's so much out there, because it's so easy to do these days. It's like, what do you take on as gospel, or what do you disregard? And the thing that you start to notice when you obviously watch hours and hours and hours worth of these types of tutorials is that half of them aren't tutorials, just regurgitate information. It's just like, well, you know, you're not telling me anything new. I've heard this from the actual people that have made records that I appreciate.
Exactly.
And I don't know anything that you've done.
Yep.
But anyway, enough of that. Sick. So talk to us about your process then, even with your, you know, Mix on the Move.
Yep.
What does a session look like? Like when you're working with someone or even working on your own stuff?
Yeah.
Paint us a picture.
I try to keep it a bit concise between, like, if I'm working for myself, I try to think of it as working with a client as well. Obviously, it can't quite be like that. But in terms of pre-production and organization of the session and then the following through with recording, it's all the same. So normally, especially if I'm working with a client, I get them to send me the songs that they're wanting to record, whether or not it's even more than that, and we'll narrow it down to an EP or a couple songs or whatever it is. And then I go in with pre-pro with them. So this can either be done via Skype, but with Mix on the Move as well, I can travel to the artist as well, and sometimes do, obviously. So that'll just involve really gauging what the client wants to get out of it. So whether or not they do want it to be more, you know, pop, or if they do just want to express themselves, you know, at the end of the day, I want them to be happiest in their product.
Cool.
And then we'll go through the pre-pro, structuring all the songs. I'll usually demo it out, etc. And then if I'm going to be recording it in my van, like most of that sort of stuff, I'll usually get the drums recorded at Restless Noise. I normally just hire Tim to do it. He's a great drummer as well, super talented. He knows his setup straight away, so I don't even have to be there kind of thing. And he just tracks out the drums for me and gives me a bunch of drums to the song. So start with the drums, and that saves us a bit more time in the actual session with the artist as well.
Beautiful.
And then we just focus on layering it. Usually I'll play bass or something. I tend to work with like individual clients rather than full bands. I do work with full bands, and it'll be the same process, but there's less. There's more cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, and so there's less. And
even space is probably like a huge thing. Obviously, being in the back of a van,
it's like, van, exactly.
4 or 5 other people hanging out. It's like, can't all fit in here. Sorry.
Exactly. And in a lot of the sort of, like in Wrangler's early studio, it was in the small room in the back, and that as soon as you put a band in there, it was just, you know, hot and sweaty and just it's so hard to focus. And then Restless Noise has a bit more space than that room did, but like it's not, you know, a massive studio or anything like that. So it's like I just tend to find it a little easier to really work with the client and get them what they want. And for me, it's all about making sure that they're happy and I'm producing the product they want, but I'm also producing the product that it needs to be as well at the same time, you know, taking ownership of my part in that. So we'll do the pre-production, get in, then it'll just be down to tracking. There'll be some basic bed stuff that we've got worked out that we want, but then it's like, get that down and just go hammy, having fun, you know, really enjoying other layers of instruments, and then do vocals another day, just so that we're not worn out and we can just layer those vocals. I love harmonies, so I just get tons of them and anything. Nice. So I probably love them a bit too much sometimes, but I don't care.
No such thing. No such thing.
I'm glad you agree.
Stack them. Seriously, just
stack
get
them up.
70 layers, man. Who cares?
My favorite thing. You just layer and layer and layer, and then whatever you don't need, you just cut out, and it's like, it's just great, you know. It's just, and then don't you always need all that much instrumentation as well if it's not called for in the song.
Well, I think what you pointed out there what stood out to me there was having a connection with the person that you're working with. And so does that just kind of happen over time? Do you have like a period of like getting to know the person beforehand, or is it straight into work most of the time?
I try to communicate with the client as much as possible prior to going into the studio, so that once we're there, we're on the same page and there's that level of trust automatically. I need the client to trust that I know what I'm doing once we're there. Because the way I see it, this is your time and your money. So I've got a job to do. I can get that job done. I know it, but we need to be on the same page, sort of thing. So there needs to be as few ums and ahs or, you know, this or that. Like if there's something that you're even not too sure about, but I am very sure of it, I want you to just already know that you can trust that it's going to be okay, you know, like we'll just do it, go roll with my idea. And, you know, in the end, it pops out this awesome sort of song that they're always happy with so
Yeah.
far, you know, and knock on wood, it keeps going that way,
Yeah,
obviously. But yeah, that trust is just imperative. So I really try to have as many, you know, go to their rehearsals or Skype with them and write with them and
cool.
make them also feel if like some clients will come to me with just an acoustic recording and it's just a bit, like maybe just the chorus even doesn't even have a verse. And so I'll write the verse out with them. But everything I do, I try to make sure that they're being aware of imposter syndrome, like that they're not going into this thinking that they're not good enough. Like they're just as important, obviously, you know?
Absolutely.
That's
I mean, there's no product without
Well, that's it. Like that's the reality.
And there's no, like the music that the client brings to you is their music.
Exactly.
So it's like, yeah, absolutely. It's so important. Talk us through some of the difficulties that you've had, even if that's just setting up with Mix on the Move, apart from van issues and stuff like that. But even in sessions and things like that too.
Yeah, totally. Mix on the Move is a little easy to deal with because it's more just like a production house. Anything that's done in there is DI, guitars and stuff, obviously. And drums I can't record drums in there. So drums will be recorded somewhere else. So that doesn't tend to cause too many problems. The only real problem I ever had there was tracking vocals with the client one time in the van. And it's pretty good because it's like well soundproofed and stuff as well. Too soundproofed for mixing, but like I got to do that for warmth. And my inverter, which is running the 240 volt system, was just fanning up because it was hot, like it was a hot day, and I was like, I really didn't like it. I didn't. This is suddenly becoming less and less viable. What the hell's going on? But I've recently upgraded my inverter, so it doesn't do that anyway now, which is good. But you know, they're all just learning. Those are learning processes. But otherwise, that one's pretty fine. In the studio, particularly more so in my early days, a lot of it would come down to, I suppose, confidence. It took me a little bit to actually get confident with, you know, not so much the structure of how you do things in the day, but just when it came to getting points where something needed to change or, you know, those types of things where I didn't necessarily have the full confidence or understanding of getting that across to the client because I would be overly concerned with, you know, making it the best experience possible for them sort of thing, you know?
Oh, it's a tightrope. Yeah.
Yeah, so like those things, and then when they couple with just gear not working, suddenly you're just plugging into a line and it's not working. And you plug into another line, and it's just not coming through that line, and you're going through the IU, and you're just like, just trying to make it look like nothing's wrong and just trying to get it done as quick as possible. No, I'm just having a look at it. Like those things, they just start to wig you out even more. And particularly in the early days, like now I'm like, I get it. That's just a part of it. You're just supposed to work through those things, figure it out. But in the early days, that was like a tough one to sort of deal with. It would just put a lot of pressure in my head straight away. And then always obviously resolve it. And it was never actually all that big of an issue. And that helped me learn. But
And so what's like on the opposite side to that, a good either production session or a recording session? What does that look like to you?
Like, and it's happened a few times when the clients are literally crying at the end of it because they're happy. And that just, like, there's nothing more that I want, you know? Because that's the goal. Like, I got into this because I've recorded music so often with other engineers and producers who just haven't even given a shit. You know? They're there for the job and that's it. And you're putting your heart and soul into this thing, you know? And even if it's not that good, it's still your heart and your soul. Like, and so just... That's probably
unreal.
The best experience. Like, it's just crazy, and like hugs and high fives all going around.
Totally.
You're just like, man, this is what it's here for. And then you hit playback and you're like, yeah, we did it, dude. This is awesome. Like, that's...
I had a recent experience with Grace Frost, who's a young solo artist. She recorded her first song with me in here, and her dad like drove her here, and then he came back to pick her up at the end of the day. It was only a single day and we got one song done.
Love that.
And when he came back and he listened to what she'd done, like he started crying. And I was like, this is awesome. And she was like, Dad, like it was like wow, like this doesn't like Yeah, these sorts of things, they're not stuff that you think about when you're going into it, but you're absolutely right, because it's such an emotional thing. We really do put our everything into it as songwriters, and even just like what we might think is some shitty song, the person might have a really strong attachment to it. So you cannot treat it like that, because that's not what it is to them. So you can't make that assumption. So
no, exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So
yeah.
hey, thanks so much for listening so far. There is plenty more to come, so don't go anywhere. I just wanted to let you know that this podcast is made completely independently by myself with no sponsors. So if you like what you hear and you would like to show your support, you can send a donation to the PayPal link, paypal.me/whatsthatsound. The link is also in the show notes. Thanks so much for your support, and let's get back to it. Let's move on to mixing.
Nice.
So what kind of, first of all, was learning mixing? What did that look like to you? Was it pretty easy, or was it more of a difficult thing to learn?
The initial stages of learning mixing didn't feel that difficult, and I use feel specifically.
Yeah.
It was almost like the less I knew, the easier it was, you know? So I could do the things that I knew were good. Again, it's like it's a hard time frame for me, because it's not exactly like I started when I started, but I just thoroughly loved it. It was just insane. I'm like, I want this snare to sound like this. I'm going to make that happen. Awesome. Cool. It sounds like that. I want these guitars to be big and crunchy and just right there. Awesome. I'm going to do that. And like, I wouldn't even care. I'd just open up an EQ and just high shelf it and lift it up and just be like perfect. And people would be looking at it being like, you can't do that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It sounds good, doesn't it? You know?
Yeah.
And then further on down the line, it was kind of like you're watching more things, and then you're hearing like other professionals being like, you can't do that. And you're like, well, maybe I can't do that. And then my mixes started sort of taking like a dip, and I was like, like I don't feel like I'm producing even though it's like fundamentally better than what I was doing before, I don't feel like it has the same passion or character. You know, like
I love that, because that's a really good point, in the sense that like, you don't know what you're doing when you're first starting. So you're just experimenting, and you're just like pushing all of the plugins to the limit. You're just kind of playing around, moving knobs. Like, who knows what a compressor is until you've been using a compressor for like 3 or 4 years. Like the first few years, you have no idea what it does. You know what I mean? Like, and so you're doing the wrong thing usually. But it creates a certain sound that you wouldn't have necessarily been able to do. And I've, all the time I listen back to some of the stuff that I was doing, even only a few years ago, even only before I started working here in 2019, even just before that in 2015, 2016, I'd never be able to get the drum sounds that I was doing back then now. There's just no way, because I wasn't using the things the same way.
Yeah.
But you make a really interesting point, in the sense that when you do start to know how to use things, then sometimes you get a little bit tame.
Yes.
And you go a bit conservative, and then it's like, why can't I push shit?
Why can't I just
I'm going to do it again.
Exactly.
And then you just go, and then you realize that at the end of the day, there's absolutely no rules to how you do something. It's how it sounds at the end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest learning curve to really make me feel confident in engineering and mixing, because just that it was really disappointing when I felt like my mixes were dipping their character and stuff like that. And then once you just get that confidence to be like, no, I'm just going to do these things. But you're doing them in coupled with actually using a compressor a little more correctly now. And these other things. And you're like, okay, now I can see how I can achieve all these sounds.
The right way to push something, instead of the wrong way where it's just distorted.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 100%. And so what does mixing look like to you? Are you mixing on the go? Is that part of your process when you're working with someone, or is it always after the fact?
I tend to prefer, I suppose my process always develops, and it depends on the client, but I tend to prefer to leave the mixing for afterwards, but I'll take advantage of things like CLA guitars and CLA effects and Vox and all of these types of plugins to give some life and character and expression to the song, so that when we are tracking along to it, it's, you know, we can actually make sure that we are recording the next instrument correctly.
Yeah.
Because that's the biggest part for me in mixing, is getting it right on the way in.
Right,
you know?
right.
Once you got it right on the way in, it's just so much easier. When I first started, it was all like, oh, I'll just record this big fat guitar and then it doesn't sound right now, but I'll fix that later, you know? Sure. And it's like, if it doesn't sound right now with the drums, then it's not gonna without a lot of work, you know?
Yeah.
So I try to, I really focus in the process on just making sure the tones and, you know, any compression that I might be using on the way in and EQ and all of that stuff is right. And then, you know, then I can really focus on the mix after.
Yeah. And so what does the mix look like after? Do you always start with certain elements, or is it kind of depending on the song?
I think I've got a pretty standard level that I go through. So normally, first thing I want to work on is the kit, at least to a basic level. Like I do basic treatment to everything down the line, starting with the kit and the kick, really, anyway.
Kick comes first.
One in the same. And so, you know, I like to sort of anything that's going to be stereo that I'm not going to process too much on their own. Like my overheads, I'll just put them into stereo and all of these types of things. Just try to get my session worked out as well. My drums through a drum bus. I often separate my kick from my actual drum bus.
Okay.
In like heavy rock songs, because I really want to control that punch going through. And if I have it punching too much through the compressor in the drum kit, if I do have one, it can sometimes just
sucks the life out
too
of
much.
it.
Yep. And then I'll, you know, set up my buses for my master chains. It's weird, like, because now I mix more in Logic than Pro Tools, but I'll just sum things. So I'll sum my some of my guitar tracks and stuff like that, and anything that I can bounce down straight away that I don't have to worry to, I will. You know, just
absolutely.
Stereo stem.
Well, it just makes that workflow of mixing, actual mixing, a lot quicker.
Exactly.
Because you get all of that, you know, I don't know if it's left brain or right brain, but one of them, you get that stuff out of the way first so that you're not having to do it during the mix. And
exactly.
It just makes for a more creative and fluid mix session. So
more like, you know, the thing that we got into mixing for was just mixing and having fun with it too a bit. 100%. So it's like being able to set myself up to do that. Like I'll always set up a pre-session. I'll do those main little things, get things treated the way I want, some transient shaping on the kicks and snares as well, you know, just my appropriate low cuts and high cuts to everything. Right. And then I'll usually bounce all that down and take it into a separate session. This is obviously after all the comping and editing and all those types of things.
That's cool.
And then I'll bounce that down into a fresh session. So I feel like I've got, you know, some now my tracks are really where I kind of want them. And it's a lot easier to balance them at that point.
That's
and
awesome.
Then set my balance, get everything where I want it. And then I'll go through like some more proper treatment on the drums, you know, setting out the snare verbs and things like that as well. The room verbs if I want it. Bass is always a pretty good one. Bass is I pretty much nail straight away. It's like I need to get that working. I get the kick and the snare pumping. I need my bass fitting in with that. Cool. Now I can fit the rest in, you know.
Cool.
And then like vocals to bring the life out of it. And then I'll start focusing on like effects. You know, I'll either shut that session down or like bounce down the stems of those sums so that I've got stereo stems of like all my guitars and leads. Take that into another session and then I can do all the, you know.
Well, I can imagine like that's probably more likely why you have that more of an organic sound is because you're focusing on the elements as a whole. You know, you've once you've done the individual mixing of a kick drum and a snare drum and toms and overheads, now you've got a drum kit.
Yes.
And so you're mixing the drum kit.
Exactly.
You know, that to me in my head makes sense that it leads to a more organic, you know, band in a room type of a mix. Which is really great for, you know, feeling like a song has life. You know, that's I think a lot of the problem with, you know, digital and really, really clean stuff. Not that I have a problem with it. It's more the problem of those sorts of things is it doesn't necessarily sound like a band in a room. So it can tend to lose that emotional impact. To me, that's what I think.
agree.
But
exactly. Which is like my inspiration for it because I mean, like I say, I have no problem. I love all styles of music, and I don't care what the sound is, kind of thing.
Yep.
But, sometimes I want to listen to a band and I want it to feel like I'm listening to a band and, some people who are in that room actually playing guitars and drums and all of that sort of stuff.
100%. Do you have favorite elements in a mix? Like, do you just love drums or vocals, or what's your favorite thing?
I mean, I love mixing the drums. Like, that's always one of my favorite things to do. I love snares, like just insane. Sometimes I just mix them too loud or whatever, but it's like, I don't care. It's awesome. I want that to be the centerpiece. I'm happy with the way this snare sounds, thuddy and just, but crack in the good right places, that sort of thing. As much as I love guitars, they're probably like my least favorite thing to mix. Not that I don't like it, but I tend to find it doesn't actually require all that much work, particularly if you've got the tone right on the way in.
Well, that's probably what is leading to that. For sure. Do you have like a favorite, like even like project that you've worked on? There's like, would you say that your solo stuff that you have written recently is probably your favorite things, or do you prefer to work on client stuff? Bit of a weird question.
No, but I think it's a good question. There's no doubt that I definitely love working on my own stuff, just from the sense of having spent so much time writing music and someone else being in charge of the bringing it to life aspect kind of thing. There's something really rewarding at this point in time in being able to go, all right, I've got a vision for a song. I've tracked out the demo, right? I'm tracking in the things that I actually want now. Now I'm mixing it and holy shit, this sounds like what I wanted it to sound like, But the downfall to that is that I had a vision at the start and I end up with that vision and it's in some senses kind of boring and less exciting.
Right.
And the thing that helps me develop my style, both in writing and mixing and all of these things, is definitely working with other clients. There's something, you can spend a lot more time on your own thing as well, just trying to achieve your one sound and narrowing down on this one guitar part or tone or whatever. But like working with the client, you're on a time frame, you're on a budget, all of these types of things. So it forces you to be more efficient, have more executive decisions about those
absolutely
things.
I think absolutely that's one of the main things that I found from working here and primarily working on other people's stuff, whereas in the early days I was exclusively working on my own things. The difference is that you do have deadlines and that you can't just waste people's time. So you have to learn to be quick at stuff and make quick decisions and not second guess, and be okay with the fact that if you make a mistake in that moment, that's okay. You can just keep working and it'll eventually sort itself out, because it always does. At the end of the day, there's nothing that is that irreparable unless you lose a session.
Exactly right.
Like, which touch wood hasn't happened yet. But I mean, it's a really good point. I've got an analogy for songwriting as well with collaborating in general, and it is more in terms of songwriting. Is if you think of songwriting by yourself, you can only draw from your own experiences and influences, right? So I liken it to a tree. When you're songwriting by yourself, you can pretty much only create a shrub. Like, you've got a small amount of, branches and leaves that can grow from that. But as soon as you add one other person into the mix, you've got a way bigger tree that has more branches, more leaves. And the branches and leaves are things like lyrics, melodies, cool ideas that kind of pop up out of nowhere. But it's because you're bouncing back and forth. You might be on the right track that you came up with. I've got this song idea. I'm going to write this song. But as soon as someone else comes in, they go, oh, that sounds like The Police. You go, I never even thought of that. And then you start to actually go towards the Police avenue, which you had never even thought of going to it. And then all of a sudden you've got a completely different song that is way bigger and way more full of life than you could have created by yourself. Which is, if you are a solo artist, I guess this is a bit of advice, is to try and work with a producer on your songs rather than creating everything yourself. Because of that, you just never know what you can create.
That's exactly it. And that's that sort of avenue that I definitely hone in on as well, when I'm trying to work with clients and stuff.
And just ask for advice. Like, get feedback on a track. Like, what does this sound like to you? What can I improve on? It's just like,
makes
crucial.
all the difference in the world, you know?
Yeah.
And often it's the difference between you actually even putting it out there or not. And that was a pretty big thing. Like that was one of the massive things about Tim, you know, and Will and that coming into the studio and being like, oh, music's awesome. Why aren't you releasing? Because I'd stopped releasing music since 1891. I lost like a whole bunch of confidence with it, you know, just going through life and stuff in late 20s. And things weren't really working out at school and stuff. And I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And it's like I just stopped even releasing music, but never stopped writing and recording it, you know?
Yeah.
And then, you know, at one point, years later after I met Tim, this was just before COVID really, actually, he called me up and he was like, you know what, I'm confident enough in my engineering. I want you to come down and we're going to work on some of your tracks. Like, these are the two I want to work on. Come down, let's do it. And we recorded them. And they were the first two songs I'd released in 5 years. And it was just like, that is insane. Because, I mean, I was releasing music since I was 10 in the schoolyard, you know, giving out shitty little records and stuff that I was doing. And so it was just like that was so important. And just what it brought, I mean, Tim, once again, is just unbelievably talented. And what he would bring, you know, and understand in what I wanted to achieve out of my music, you know, and stuff. We have a lot of the same influences, but different styles. So just opened up the doors, and it's like now I'm like he's my go-to all the time. Like I'm always sending him my mixes, or you know, same vice versa. We just nerd out on it and just have each other to be honest and tell you, no, I don't really like this, and it doesn't even matter if you don't care that they don't like, you know, it's just whatever. It's just all information. It's just
correct. It's all just someone's piece of feedback, but coming from a place of, they know what they're doing. So
exactly.
It's like you don't have to always take opinions on board, but they're coming from a good place. So it's just worth listening to that and being like, okay, and just mulling it over and being like, what can I take from that? And you know,
if you do that and you don't like take it personally or something, if it's not in that moment, it always comes back at a time where you're like, I could see. I wouldn't have thought to now take this by this angle in this new song or something, but I'm now thinking about that thing they were talking about in the other one, you know? It's just always help. Like, it's so important to have someone honest. Like
100%.
You know?
Let's get geeky.
Yes, let's do it. I love it.
Talk us through some of your favorite bits of hardware.
Yes, or hardware. All right. Well, I don't always get to work with heaps of outboard hardware.
Yep.
At Wrangler, we built up a pretty decent collection of hardware.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's the Art 76 replicate there, and that I really like that compressor. It's a really nice one.
What would you use that on?
Tend to use that on guitars. Initially, I'd use that on vocals and stuff like that as well. But particularly with the Art, it was just adding too much saturation.
Right.
That I like my vocals to be very clean, so I can add the saturation, you know, down the track.
Sure.
I don't like starting it with too much saturation.
Yep.
Unless it, you know, requires it.
Yep.
But subsequently, we got a DBX 160A, and that I started using on vocals, which is like not
known.
So I heard it is not very conventional, but I was like, whatever, it sounds awesome, right?
Good.
Just adds this clean body underneath to the vocal.
It's a really interesting compressor because there's not much control over it. Like you just set the compression level and then that's it. And it's like, it's kind of like depending on the input, depending on the compression, there's not much control over times. It's an interesting compressor, and I've heard some people say that they like it on mixed compression, and I've tried it a couple of times, and
I've never tried that.
Yeah, I haven't fully got it right, so it's not one that I go to. But I'm always like trialing things and
right? And it's just like if you find a way that it works, awesome, cool, go for it. Like I don't tend to use the DBX for anything else, even in plugin form. I actually was kind of like a DBX, you know, at first. Because I'd used it in plugins and I was like, just of course, that was back when I didn't really understand how to run a compressor anyway, but I was like, it's just never doing what I wanted to do, you know?
Yep. What about microphones?
So I'm actually building a studio at my brother's new place with him. They're about to move into it, so we're building a studio there. There's the dude who used to own the place worked for ABC and had his own studio in there, so it's literally just perfect. And fortunately for that, we've got a couple Neumanns for vocals, and we've got those now because
87s or 47s?
47 and an 87, yeah.
Nice.
And we've got those because I used those back in my old band Waverley when we recorded it with Craig Harneth and Jez Giddings. Used that, and it was just like, it's really difficult for me to find a vocal microphone that works good with my voice. It's a unique voice.
Okay,
It's not necessarily a singer voice, but it's a character voice kind of thing.
Cool.
So
it's
hard to find that. So got a couple of those because they're awesome. Crazy that we've got those. You know, like they are expensive. So I'm just like, geez, thanks. Like insane. I can't believe I'm get to work with some of them. But otherwise, like alternatives for that, I really like ribbon microphones, oddly enough. I say oddly enough because I like brighter sounds and stuff, but I find that if you have a darker microphone for a particular thing and you run it through the right preamp, then you can sort of taper off the harsher bit of the high, but then push it back through another, post preamp. And it just sounds so smooth and cool and awesome, but the body stays intact and all that sort of stuff. It's not like, pricking in your ears and stuff too much.
Absolutely.
Really like ribbon microphones, but I mean, what do I say? Oddly enough, like 7Bs, I don't actually tend to like them all that much for vocals. Every time I've ever used them, they've just sort of had this honkiness to it that I can't quite get rid of, and sometimes I think that's obviously just my method of recording it or whatever it is. But
could even be the voices.
Could be, and it could be that. It could just
or
be
even
those.
The performance and things like that.
Exactly, because I've heard people using 7Bs, and I'm like, well, no, that's awesome. That's what I want. And then I go to use it, and I'm like, why the hell isn't this working?
Like that Simpsons. Why does it look like that?
Exactly right. So nice. It's hard to tell, but. That like microphones, I mean, I kind of just love anything. Like obviously 57s are great, but I just like having a selection of them so I can try. Ashton is a really cool condenser. I love the brightness on that for acoustic guitars and stuff. Cool. It is a bit pricky, so you have to blend it in with another mic, but really, really nice. Really nice mic. Let's
move to software. Give us some of your some go-to plugins.
Go-to's 100%. Saturn 2 is one of my best friends. Thanks, Eric Valentine, for teaching me about that one. It's just crazy. It's like transform my mix process. I try to look for plugins that take out, what the Saturn does for me would have taken me 3 steps and 3 plugins to do previously, 3 or 4 steps kind of thing. Because it's adding a level of saturation, but it's also splitting that saturation so it doesn't have to be too much on, whichever one you are with the multiband. Therefore, subsequently, it's also a level of compression. And it just, and in theory, like a little bit of EQ as well, if, depending on how you do it. So,
well, depending on the setting of the, which input you
exactly right,
and stuff like that. It's crazy.
I tend to just use like tape or tube, but when I do use the other ones, I'm just like, this is insane. This plugin is just a gift that keeps giving. Like,
well, one thing that I love Saturn on is bass guitar because you want to treat the different areas of the frequency range of a bass in different ways. You don't want your bass, the real bottom end, to do too much distortion because it ruins the actual bass of it, but then you don't want to do it too much on the really high part of the bass because then the moving of the hand, you can hear that too much, or the pick attack or whatever it might be. So splitting that up and attacking that in different ways and just adding little bits of subtle saturation here and there on those parts, but then cranking the actual distortion on the center bit to give it that real dirty bass tone. I love it.
It's crazy.
It's unreal.
Right? Yeah.
It's unreal.
Like that's transformed my bass mixing. I remember I struggled a bit to really, I love big bass and I struggled to get it right, and just with chucking that, it's always the first one that I'll do, and I'll use like a tube on the low end just to keep it a little more round, conventionally. And then I'll go warm tape just in a band between 600 and a K to try and get that 800, and I just push it a whole way, and then I'll crank it down like on the actual band a little bit if I need to, and then I'll mellow out the highs just with usually warm tape as well or something like that, just to keep it a bit smoother, But just those options, insane. I used to use a lot of the Slate stuff. I've still got my Slate subscription, but I'm thinking of moving away from it. Not that I have a problem with Slate, like it's just too much to choose from in all the plugins. not in Slate, like just within all the you know, plugin
just
brands.
available of everything.
Yeah. So Slate was my favorite. Slate taught me about what I wanted to get out of plugins and stuff. Like the virtual mix rack is so good, and the preamps and the tape saturation on that is just so good, you know.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can combine that. But what always bothered me about the virtual mix rack is I can't stick a reverb just after my preamp.
Yeah.
So I'd have to go a mix rack just for my initial preamp saturation or whatever, and then I'd have to, you know, stick something and then stick it on for the rest. So that kind of bothered me, and that's what I liked about Saturn, where it sort of saved me a couple of those steps as well.
Yep.
I really liked their gate for a bit, especially in like rock song, where I just don't want anything else coming in. I just want that kick, you know. Just clicking, or if I need to gate something to use it in a trigger. Say, you know, it's super handy for that.
Yep.
But I've recently got the Fab Filter plan, so
nice.
Like the Pro G gate's just awesome, the Pro MB, like all of these types of things. And then I also bought a subscription to Plugin Alliance because I'm just addicted to plugins.
Don't worry. When I first went freelance, I went through that exact thing of like just thousands of dollars worth of plugins, and it's like gotta have it all. And then you do find ways to use them.
Yes.
I think most people would, but then there are other ones that you're like, I didn't need to buy that.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's why trialing plugins is really cool, but I still don't do it. But anyway, I kind of just take the jump. If I know I want something, then I just do it and live with the consequences, because it's like there will be a time when I use it.
It's never like that big of an, you know.
Unless you're buying $400 plugins each time, which there's not many of them anyway, so it's like.
And usually you can always just, you know, be a little bit patient and get it on a Black Friday sale or whatever, and it's like nuts cheap. What I like about Plugin Alliance is that you buy their plugins, you buy the subscription, but then either you pay the year up front and they straight away give you $250 to just buy plugins. And they do that every single year. Or if you're on the subscription, they'll give it to you at the end. But I like that idea because it means I'm going to keep that subscription. There's like the Brainwork stuff is just too good, and I don't have a UAD interface, so I can't use that stuff. I've got UADX though now, Spark, and I mean that's just those. If it wasn't for getting Fab Filter and UAD Spark, I'd consider keeping Slate, but I'm just now like I can't. I don't think I can keep that one anymore. Only things I really use from Slate these days now is like the Kilohertz package, which I can just
Kilohertz is great,
you know, for free anyway from Kilohertz.
So good.
Yeah, Kilohertz is amazing.
Multipass and SnapHeap are crazy plugins. I love those.
The transient shape of me is just so easy and just does exactly what I want, like on my keyboard. You know? Like,
absolutely.
nuts.
I love it, man. Well, we'll start to wrap it up, but what I like to do towards the end is just find a final bit of advice for any people that are just starting out as producers and engineers, and then also some advice that you might have for any artists that might be listening as well. Yeah,
totally. Particularly for producers and engineers, just do it. Like just get yourself Logic or whatever, GarageBand, like find yourself a crack. Most of these companies, I'm not suggesting anyone should do anything like that, but most of these companies kind of do that inbuilt regardless, because they go, well, if you're using Logic as a crack, then you're going to buy Logic when you need it, you know, and or at least that's how it used to be. So I'm like, do what you need to do to get your basics set up so that you can just start tracking, and then just start tracking with some friends that you can trust, you know, whether you write or they write or you both write or whatever, just get into it and start collaborating and working and just seeing what you can get, so you actually start to know what your problems are. And trust me, they're never going to go away. One solution means in some senses 2 more problems and down the track, and that's just the way it is. But that's the beauty of it. Like you're never I shouldn't say you never, but it's going to be a long, long time until you're actually really confident, and that's okay. That's what makes you get better. Just keep doing it. Watch videos. Like I'm starting to put up videos of my mix sessions and stuff. Like more and more people are being transparent about it. Just watch it, but also don't try to do what someone else does. And this is what I say in my videos. Like, you find your style. These are just my things. Hopefully 1 or 2 things sticks with you. You know, that's all it is. It's just nice to observe.
Absolutely.
Same thing for artists, though. If you've got a friend who wants to be an engineer, work together to just get that happening, and then just make some music together. That's the only experience I have of it, me and my brother just had a studio, little basic setup, and we just recorded and recorded and recorded.
Yep.
And it was the best fun in the world. Yeah. And like, you know, here I am 35 and I'm still doing it. And I'd never see me stopping, like dropping out of my biotech degree twice because I'm like, I might like that, but I'm addicted. Like, you know, if it's for you, it's for you. Just do
100%,
it.
100%. I love that, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Where can people find you online, or if they want to reach out to you?
So I've got my website, mixonthemove.com.au, which has like my Gmail and stuff, which you can contact, and just a bit of information about what I do. I probably should update it a little bit better nowadays, but
Constantly
still,
updating websites,
right?
aren't we?
You know, everything changes.
Yep.
But that's pretty relevant. Or if you want to listen to my music, it's on the band name's Dilly, Dilly. So you can go there and listen to my songs that I'm releasing. I'm sort of working towards doing more of an EP rather than just releasing singles at the moment.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if you're ever recording at Restless Noise, I'm sure you'll probably see me or hear about me. Me and my boy Timmy, we're always working together. So
cooking stuff up. Love it.
Those are the main two places. But, you know, Insta and all that, I've got that for Mix on the Move and Dilly. So yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thanks so much for joining me. This has been awesome.
So much fun.
So much fun. Heaps of really, really cool advice. Thank you guys for checking us out, for listening, watching. As always, if you liked this, please show your support and share it to a friend. Spread the word, hit follow or subscribe on whichever platform you're on. Thank you so much for your support so far. It's been awesome, but there's more to come. So stay tuned for the next episode of What's That Sound? See ya. Thanks for listening to What's That Sound? Make sure you hit follow or subscribe on your podcast platform to stay up to date with each new episode. We'll catch you next time.